Walking alone, the streets are empty. The only thing I can see is my own silhouette. I'm getting stronger, step by step. The clock is ticking, but there's no time for regrets. I've been flying from town to town, from London to Taiwan. I've been all around the globe, trying to protect your soul.
The Minirig Mark III versus the Minirig Mark II. So it's basically an overview of the Mark III, but I can't really do an overview without comparing it to the Mark II, because a lot of people with the Mark II are obviously going to be thinking, is it worth the upgrade? I will go over individually the features of the Mark III, because you may be coming to the Minirig for the first time and still want to know. But I would imagine most people coming to this video have probably seen one of my previous videos or other videos, or know about the Minirig. Just want to get a handle on what has changed between the Mark II and the Mark III. So I'm going to try and cover everything. Can't cover it in one video. I have got a pair of Mark IIIs. I have got a pair of the subs. I do want to cover everything. One in mono, two in stereo, a 1.1, a 2.1, a 2.2. I was going to do that with the Mark IIs until they suddenly come out with the Mark III. I didn't know it was on the horizon. I'd already put my money into the Mark II. A little bit gutted. Now, I did ask them, I said, I'm doing these videos, I've already put money into the Mark II, could you let me have the Mark III? Because I've seen them hand it out to some other reviewers. They said, well, not going to let you have one, but we'll lend it to you. I had to think about it and thought, actually, better off just buying it, because then I'm going to keep them anyway. I also have to point out, all my sound clips are on software 13. When I got them, it was on software 12. I upgraded to software 13 using the Minirig update app, and I got some improvements for stereo connectivity. Still a little bit flaky, but it improved a bit. However, as I sit down for this video, I see an email saying we've now come out with software 14, and it brings bass improvements. I have to say, in this video, you'll see software 13. I don't know what was changed in the bass. I had a quick listen and it wasn't that obvious to me, but I will also do at some point comparison 13 to 14. So I will be mentioning the bass in my clips, and just to point out, they have brought out a new software version which may address that bass issue. So you will get your Minirig Mark III. It's going to come in a travel pack. That's not to be sniffed at, because a lot of these speakers don't come with travel packs or travel bags at all. You're going to have to go on eBay. It's going to cost you a few quid extra, like JBL used to give you a travel pouch. They don't seem to give you any more. So you do get a travel pouch with your Minirig, and it comes in an actual little cardboard box. So it's well packed for delivery. What's in the box, what's in the pack. So you'll open it up. There is your Minirig. And I will say, if you are buying bundles, do not make the mistake of getting everything in one color like I did with my Mark II, and then you can't tell the difference. It's important with the Minirigs to tell the difference between speakers, because you'll have one as a main left side speaker when you're doing them in stereo, and you want to know which is the main and which isn't. So I didn't make that mistake this time. I've got red, I've got gold. You also get, there's a little bit of packing just to make it super, super safe. And actually, the rest of the box is over there. I'm going to go and get it. So I'm back with the box. Right, so this is what I was trying to show you. Comes in a cardboard box like that. That comes in. But you also get in your box a little chain for your Minirig. Obviously, it's not for the speaker, but you can attach it to your travel pouch. There's a little hook there, and you can carry it like that. I'm not sure that's something I'm going to be making use of, but it is something they're giving you. And you know, JBL cutting back on all the stuff they used to give you. It's nice to see some people still give you extra stuff in the pack. A little sticker. You also get a little booklet thingy here. Is it just the guarantee? It's basically your safety instructions in a few different languages. I will say they make a big play now that their packaging is recycled and recyclable. So they're environmentally friendly. And by the way, Minirig, of course, is a UK-based company, if you didn't know. You get your little charging cable. Some people do not like these charging cables because it covers both bases. You can use your Minirig as a power bank. You can charge out as well as charge in. And you do that via this charging cable. So one end goes out, one end goes in. Some people don't like that. When you've got a few of them and you've got a 2.2 system, it's a little bit bulky to try and get them into the USB slot. And actually, I did say I've had problems with that, and they sent me some smaller ones, I think from the Minirig Mini, which doesn't have the double-ended bits, which I find quite useful, and they didn't charge me for sending either. You also get your auxiliary cable, and it's a big deal with Minirigs because most speakers, auxiliary is an afterthought and it's not ready to be used, and the processing doesn't really go through the auxiliary, and they don't sound good at all in auxiliary. Minirig are different because auxiliary is actually a higher quality mode. Minirig started as auxiliary only, and they've developed Bluetooth on top of that. So you do get good quality auxiliary with Minirigs. So you also get your auxiliary cables. You will of course be attaching your sub by auxiliary anyway, even though the Minirig itself is Bluetooth, the subs are not. Hopefully one day there will be, but it doesn't look like that's on the horizon anytime soon. So that's what you'll get in your box. The Minirig 3 itself, it has 3 inputs, the middle one being for charging. And then you get a high gain auxiliary and a low gain auxiliary. That means if you're linking out to another Minirig, it's effectively a high gain lead as opposed to a low gain if you wanted it at lower volume, because you're trying to match them. But anyway, you can switch low gain and high gain with the LED. These auxiliary inputs, outputs, they are two-way, and you can also feed something that isn't a Minirig. For instance, you can use these, as well as the Mark II, I have to say, as a Bluetooth receiver. That is, you connect, you say, your headphone to one of these auxiliary inputs. It gives out the whole of the feed. So if you go into the app and you turn off or you mute the volume in the app, you then can control your non-Bluetooth headphones using the volume in the normal way, as long as it's been muted in the app. So you don't normally get Bluetooth receivers with, batteries that size. And what's one of the things about Bluetooth receivers is they tend to be very small and the battery doesn't last long. That is quite useful. I mean, it's not that portable if it's just for a Bluetooth receiver. Just saying, that is something else you can do with your Minirigs. You do get a lot of options. Just also say, we talk about Minirigs, it's all about low gain, high gain. The preamp will feed a low gain or a high gain. Obviously high gain being a little bit noisier, but the low gain not giving the volume you're going to get with the high gain, but it's going to be a cleaner signal. It's a higher quality, and I've done previous videos on this. It is higher quality. There's more body to the sound, but you don't get that much volume. You may find even at full volume, even with the new Mark III in low gain, it just doesn't go loud enough. But I'll get on to all that just to say, because I want to give a quick overview for people coming to this for the first time, but there's a lot to get through. It will come on in high gain. That's just gonna, so one quick press on the LED will just tell you the power level. You'll go different colors depending on the power level. That went green. It's 75 to 100% charge. You've got to hold it down and wait for the tone. I now know that's on, and it will stay on. It's bright green. That tells me it's high gain. But if I press it once, it fades. That's low gain. That's the high quality mode. But you can now, with the Mark III, lock the gain mode. So whichever mode you had it in, that's the mode it will start up next time you play it, which is very useful. That's been really awkward on the Mark II. You can't lock the gain. If I wanted it in low gain, I turn it off, it's going to come on in high gain. Outside in bright sunlight, you can't really see what it is. So that's a useful feature. And that's something that is different between the Mark II and the Mark III. So what's still the same? Well, if you only buy one, it's still a mono speaker. Obviously, it has one driver. They are both 70mm drivers, the Mark II, the Mark III. However, Mark III is a new driver. So what was a 15-watt speaker is now a 40-watt speaker. And that's obviously the big headlines to take away. But there are little features as well. For instance, one of the really annoying things about the Mark II was these little feet always dropping off. And I know whenever you go on and you tell them, oh, my feet are dropping off, and they say, oh, it's really unusual. And yet you go online, a lot of people are complaining. You can see one missing here. I've lost it. They do keep coming off. The Mark III has them molded on. They are not going to come off. So it's a different base, and it's a little bit smoother. That's like a hard plastic, whereas this is a softer. So it's nicer to the feel. I must say, they call this anodized aluminium now. It's kind of the same to me. I think they're saying it's a different kind of finish. Kind of feels, well, that's a more gritty finish, and that's a smoother finish, to be honest. But that's what happens if you put it the other wrong way around. They keep coming on. Let's turn that off. The grills are still the same, like a honeycomb type grill. The only real differentiating thing between them is one says Minirig 3 on the bottom and the other one doesn't. It says MRBT without a number, whereas on my Minirig 3 it does indeed say MRBT 3. You may be wondering, well, one sub used to match one Minirig Mark II, 15 watts, 15 watts. 40 watts now, so can't use it with the sub. Well, they say they have designed it to work in line with the Mark III, just that they work different. The Mark III doesn't drop bass, whereas if you attach a sub to the Mark II, it does cut its own bass. So it's kind of all the bass is coming from the sub, and the rest of the highs, the mids coming from the unit itself. Whereas with the Mark III, the sub is filling out that low end and extending it. So they're working, but in two different ways. I have had a listen. It really does work that way. They are still the same size, exactly the same size, but there's a little bit difference in weight. 488 grams versus 550 grams. So not a lot, but it's a little bit heavier now in the Mark III. They both still support aptX and AAC, and of course wireless stereo pairing. But with the Mark III, you can now connect unlimited numbers of mini rigs together. The Mark II, you couldn't do that. Although you could daisy chain them with auxiliary wires, but you can do this now wirelessly with the Mark III. They are both still splash resistant, so you can splash them a bit. Do not drop them in water. Do not pour water over them. You're going to have a problem. New with the Mark III, you get a 5-band graphic equalizer in the app, in which you can embed the settings into the Minirig Mark III itself. That's really handy. Official ratings, 70 Hz to 16,000 kHz Mark II, 60 Hz to 18,000 kHz. So it goes a little bit higher in the upper end, goes a little bit deeper. Now, I will say, I will get onto it again later, but obviously as you get louder, it drops bass anyway. So the question is, I'm not sure at what volume those ratings are, but generally speaking, yes, it goes a little bit deeper, but a lot louder in the bass. Big difference in charging speeds. Was limited to 800 milliamps on the Mark II, now 1.5 amps on the Mark III. So you double the time, or you half the time to charge. I think it's around 8 hours on the old one, about 4 to 5 hours on the Mark III to charge it. Playback time, maximum volume, about 15 hours they say now in the Mark III, about 7 hours on the Mark II. So huge difference now in usable playback time, in that it's at maximum volume. It's not at some cryptic, you don't know what level when they say 20 hours and you get about 2 hours in reality. At maximum volume. At low volume, they say up to 100 hours. But yes, you do get really good battery life out of the mini rigs. That was always the case. Bluetooth 4.2, Bluetooth 5. Sounds great, but most improvements in Bluetooth 5, of course, are for low battery modes. It's not going to completely change your experience. And I have to say, although you would think, oh, but I may get better Bluetooth range, they don't say that you are going to get better Bluetooth range. They rate both of them at 10 to 30 meters line of sight. I haven't tested that at this point. I probably will at some later point. So I did want to get through that quickly so I could get on to how it actually sounds. But that's never going to be quick with the mini rigs because there are so many ways to use them. And there's so many different settings and apps. So I've tried to give a quick overview, and I want to get through this and in later videos go into it in more depth. Hopefully there isn't a Minirig Mark IV just about to hit the market, and I would be able to do several videos really going into some proper in-depth overviews of all the various ways you can use them. The first thing you're going to want to know, how does it sound, the Mark III compared to the Mark II? So for me, it's pretty striking the difference between the Mark II and the Mark III. The Mark II clearly has a bigger bass. It also clearly has more clarity and seems to have a brighter nature. It's a little bit clinical to me. It's clearly technically a better speaker, but there is a lack of warmth to my ears in what I'm hearing. It's clearly an upgrade, but it's a different nature to the sound between the Mark II and the Mark III. This is the Mark II. This is the Mark III. On first look, you're thinking, well, there's not a lot of difference, except that you can clearly see the Mark III, is like 3 or 4 decibels bigger in the bass from 100 hertz down. But if you look a little bit closer, most notably between around 1000 hertz to 6000 hertz, which covers the mids, the upper bit of the mids, and the presence range, and the upper mids, the Mark III is around 3 decibels louder, stronger. And it's significant because the lower mids, around 250 to about 500 hertz, the Mark II and the Mark III are about the same. So if we look at like the 400 mark, the Mark III around 43 dB, minus 43 dB. The Mark II slightly lower, about minus 44. Minus 44, it may be a 1 decibel, but what I'm saying is the lower mids are really similar. So what you hear is a much stronger bass on the Mark III, and the upper mids and the presence range stronger by 3 decibels, whereas they are the same in the lower mids. So overall, that lends to a slightly maybe tinny sound or slightly harsh sound when you're comparing directly Mark II and Mark III. So whereas I would say the Mark III sounds technically better, but the Mark II sounds a little bit warmer, and over a long extended listening, maybe a little bit more pleasant. However, there's a clear difference between the Mark II and the Mark III, and I kind of like both, but for different reasons. But what strikes me most about the Mark III, not just listening, but you can see it when you analyze the graphs, it's a little bit boosted in the mids and the presence range, which gives it that slightly bright, maybe slightly harsh, slightly clinical nature to the sound, which you may or may not like. They both have a slight boost around 8000 hertz. Now, I thought it'd be interesting to throw the Charge 4 in because it's also a mono speaker. So we're comparing modern mono speakers. And if you look at the Charge 4, the Charge 4 is all about that 70 hertz bass boost. It's a huge boost, and it is a real boost. It isn't that strong on the original tracks, which I'll show you later. Even compared to the Mark III, it's about 7 decibels stronger, but only around that 70 hertz mark. So whereas the Mark III is a fuller, truer bass, what will hit you in a quick A/B listen is the Charge 4 has a massively bigger bass, but then it has this rapid roll-off from about 4 kilohertz down. And that's where the Mark III has that much brighter sound. I have to say the original track doesn't have the boost. It has a linear roll-off. And you could argue that Charge 4 looks a little bit more accurate. However, I have to say, other than there is that obvious boost around the 8000 hertz on the Mark III, it does sound more genuine when you're listening. The roll-off on the high end on the Charge 4 is quite ridiculous, actually, I think, to my ears, because you get no clarity at all. Basically, it's almost just a subwoofer. Switching to low gain, and the difference between them at low gain is basically the same as at the high gain. The nature, the warmer kind of sound of the Mark II is the same. What you do get when you switch to the low gain is a much stronger bass. So the Mark III low gain, high gain, you gain about 4 decibels from about 100 hertz down, while the rest of it is still pretty similar. So what you do get is an obvious even bigger bass, which you may or may not like. And slightly more than you're getting on the original tracks. Slightly, to me, it's slightly over the top. You still get this slightly brighter, more clinical nature to the sound. However, it's still, I would say, if you're listening for the technical aspects of the music, you're probably going to find this a huge upgrade over the Mark II. I thought I'd see if it's possible to tame this 8 kilohertz boost, given that you can embed EQ settings now into your Minirig 3. I went through the settings. The closest setting to adjust, of course, is the 10.5 kilohertz. I found it was a very subtle adjustment. So no EQ, -5 on the 10.5 kilohertz setting. It's still not quite straightening out as in the original track. But personally, I do think it sounds more natural. I do prefer it -5 at 10.5 kilohertz. Have a quick listen.
Walking alone, the streets are empty. The only thing I can see is my own silhouette. I'm getting stronger, step by step. The clock is ticking, but there's no time for regrets. I've been flying from town to town, from London to Taiwan. I've been all around the globe, trying to protect your soul. Walking alone, the streets are empty. The only thing I can see is my own silhouette. I'm getting stronger, step by step. The clock is ticking, but there's no time for regrets. I've been flying from town to town, from London to Taiwan. I've been all around the globe, trying to protect your soul.
It's hard to really, for me personally, to get a handle on where I am with the Mark III. At this point, I've had it for about 3 or 4 days of listening, of hard, serious listening. But that's not enough for me. It takes me a while to really adjust my ears. So for me, at this point, my personal take on it, it's clearly a big upgrade, isn't it? It's clearly technically a better speaker than the Mark II, but it has a different sound signature. And this is what I'm getting hard to get my ears around. I can hear it's technically better, but it has a clinical nature to it, slightly lacking in what I would say character or some warmth. So for me, it's just the wrong side of exciting but fatiguing. So it's a fast speaker, it's agile, but to me it sounds a little bit lean. It's a little bit on the bright side. It does help when you bring down that 10.5 kilohertz slider, and I brought it down all the way. It's still only a subtle change in the sound signature. I would find it still hard to go back to the Mark II, but I get fatigued. You know, it's not a pleasurable long listening at this point for me. It's not that round woolly sort of bass that I personally like. But you know, if you like heavy metal and stuff like that, and you like a fast, agile bass, you may well really love this speaker. So I'm only giving my personal opinion. I'm not saying it's good or bad. It's clearly a good speaker. But if you had the Mark II and you liked the Mark II for how it sounded, and that was a little bit warm, a little bit sweet, and it doesn't have that sound signature in the Mark III. It's much leaner, and it's, to me, a little bit more fatiguing. It is a bit bright. It is tuned quite high in the presence region. And I'm not sure I personally like that, but I do like it. It's just not a long-term listen for me. Not 3 and 4 hours. It's gonna do my head in a little bit. But that may well change as I add the subs, go to stereo. But a one-to-one comparison, it's a very different speaker than the Mark II. I thought it would just be the Mark II, but much better. But it isn't. It is a different sound signature. So the real big difference, of course, it goes much, much louder on paper. 15 watts, 40 watts. Going to go a lot louder. This is my loudness comparison.
Is all I'm feeling. Remember how we felt alive. I remember you. You make me stronger. Can't go without it much longer. Remember, remember. I remember you. You lift my spirit. With you high is all I'm feeling. Remember how we felt alive. I remember you. Is all
So the Mark III compared to the Mark II, both on high gain. The Mark III is now 3.6 decibels at peak, louder than the Mark II. If I take the average across the tracks, it's 4.3 decibels louder. So yes, it's like doubling the power from the old Mark II to the Mark III as it is now. It's significant. It's a lot louder. It's a 40 watt amp now on the Mark III. How does it compare then to something similar? Well, if I compare it to the Extreme 2, which may seem a little unfair, given it's a lot bigger, it's got 2 drivers. However, in terms of power, technically on battery, it's about 30 watts. It kind of matches up. However, it is a lot bigger, but just to give you a ballpark idea of where we are in loudness, the Minirig 3 at maximum is about a decibel, just under a decibel louder than the Extreme 2. But that's not the whole story, because both the Mark III and the Mark II, as you go up towards maximum volume, it basically cuts the bass. It really affects how the music sounds, how you can enjoy it at maximum volume. So you can see it's basically cutting it from 200 hertz. It's gone. It's making it quite a shrill, harshish sound. It's already a clinical kind of speaker, but it even accentuates that. So look at the Extreme 2. You're still getting the bass. I can tell you that shape there is kind of in line with the original 3 tracks, which I'll show you in a minute. And you're still getting decent bass, aren't you? Still down there at some 60, 50 hertz, you're still getting your bass peak. Relative to the rest of the music, it's still nearer the original tracks. And you can still enjoy it at maximum volume because you're getting a lot of bass. It makes it sound warm. The Mark II and the Mark III, you do not get that warmth because it's cutting all the bass. Obviously, it's designed to go with the subwoofer. In another video, I'm going to show you how it compares with the sub. However, this really is the Mark II versus the Mark III. And just to point out, the Mark III is a lot louder, but they both cut that bass as you get to that loud level, to the maximum volume levels, which is what you're probably looking for. You're going from a Mark II to a Mark III. If you've already got the Mark II, you do not get more bass. Yes, it goes louder, and in terms of sheer decibels, at say 100 hertz, 36, minus 36, compared to around minus 42. Significantly more bass, significantly louder, but relative to the rest of the track, the bass is gone at 200 hertz below. Clearly designed to go, I would say, with the sub. That's for another video. That is the original track, and you can see it's more in line with Extreme 2. In terms of what happens at low gain, well, clearly it's a lot quieter. Whether it's average or on peak, Mark III in low gain is about 14 decibels quieter than the maximum volume at high gain. It's not much of a comparison, but yes, at low gain you retain bass, but it's because it's a lot quieter. The difference now at low gain, which obviously is the quality mode between low gain and high gain. I've done another video previously about the Mark II comparing low gain and high gain, which you can have a look at. But low gain is the quality mode. How much louder does it go than previously that you could go on the Mark II? Well, it is a bit louder. It's about 2.6 decibels in peak, and there's about a decibel in it if you look at the average. But it's not particularly loud. It's just about a decent indoor close-up listen at that volume. It's not mega party levels. These are all the tracks. If you look at the original there, as I said, the Extreme 2 is the only one that has a similar curve at maximum volume. Next would be obviously Mark III in low gain. It still has that peak around 8,000, all around that, and makes it a little bit brighter than the original tracks. But at maximum volume, it's not like similar speakers that you may be looking at, such as the Extreme 2. It's not like that sort of a listen because you don't get the bass. But just to say again, the Extreme 2 is a £250 speaker, and a similar comparison would be the Mark III or the Mark II along with its sub. I'm going to do that in a different video. So I was a little bit struck just how much bass reduction there is at, the maximum volume levels, 80% and up. Significant to the extent that, the bass is basically missing. And if you're used to coming from something like the Extreme 2, those sort of bass heavy speakers, it's quite a different experience. If you like a warm sound and you probably like obvious bass, well, in terms of a warm bass, that's completely lacking now. So it's a little bit shrill a little bit edgy. It's, to me, a little bit hard to listen in maximum volume. It does go loud, it does go very loud. Given its size, it's quite incredible in many ways. But you may still find it hard to listen to because the bass is basically gone. So maybe, you know, you're gonna have to get it with the sub, but that's for another day. I was interested, well, what is the sweet spot then? There's that much bass reduction at the higher volumes. How high in volume can you go and still get a decent dollop of bass? So a little bit of a comparison. So going through the entire volume, you can see the linear change right from 6% to 100%. Watching that bass from around 150 Hertz down, you see it's a linear change all the way through as it drops off more and more as you hit 100%. There's the original track. You can see, it's interesting to note that at around a 300 Hertz and 150 Hertz, it's a very similar peak, and so the bass is relative to that 150 Hertz peak. So I'm going to look again, even the 150 Hertz. So that it really is cutting bass from 200 Hertz down. 150 and 300, from 80%, it's starting to level out as in the original track. So 80% above, dramatic reduction in bass. You have to say, for the most part, after that, you know, the 150 Hertz is pretty much in line with the 300 Hertz, but that bass, relative to the rest of the track, is more prominent as you go down entirely the whole volume scale. So an overview, the original track, down bottom right, you can see the sweet spot is probably around 40 to 60%, where you've got enough volume and still got enough of the original track in its bass. After that, the bass, you know, from 66% on, the bass it's being cut noticeably. And the result of that is a little bit of a thinner sound. So that's why I probably think it's a little bit wearing at higher volumes. Although it does go very loud for its size, no doubt about that. Even louder than the Extreme 2, if you take the decibel average across the track. And even in terms of peak, the difference being the peak on the Extreme 2 is in the bass, and the peak on the Minirig Mark III is around the mids. Seems about halfway is the sweet spot. After that, you know, is significant loss of bass. So it depends where you're coming from. If you listen, you know, at really high volume levels, it may be an issue, the amount of bass it's cutting. If you're going to get the subs, it may be a no-brainer. It may mean, well, that's not going to be a problem. The bass may well fill in the missing bass on a single Minirig. So it really depends on how you're going to use them and the way you're going to use them. But if you listen at moderate listening volumes, if you listen in low gain at not very high volume levels, you may find it a really nice listen. I do like it, I just don't think it's, for me, maybe at this point, something I can listen to for extended periods of time. I still like the sound signature of the Mark II, even though technically I can hear, you know, it's not even in the same league, is it? The bass is, when you hear them in A-B, the bass is, you know, it's puny on the Mark II. However, when I didn't hear it in an A-B, it wasn't really an issue to me. So it really depends on what you're listening out for. But there's a big difference between the Mark II and the Mark III. If you're thinking it's just the same but better, no. In my opinion, they are quite different speakers, especially if you've only got a single one and you're not adding it to a sub. So I hope you got something out of my video, and I will be trying to cover all bases moving forward. I don't know when, but I will be trying to, show you 1.1, 2.0, 2.2, and comparing it to the old system so you know exactly where you are. So thank you for watching.
UK